book 2 of the Sun Eater series. I really enjoyed this one. I didn't immediately glom onto the series at this point, but on the second listen, I really enjoyed it. I thought that this was a really fun uh, off planet. We, in the first book, were very planet bound. Everything was happening to Hadrian. He, in some ways, is starting to take control of his own destiny in this book. Lucas, the big spoiler here that I kept wanting to talk to you about. So if you don't want a spoiler, here you go. Here's your chance to shut it off because we're going to go. Spoiler alert, and we're in. Was that Khan Sagara, the king with 10,000 faces, was the leader of Vorgossos. This to me was the big reveal. I never expected this. I didn't see it coming, but I loved it. And also the whole we're starting to see what's going on in the broader universe. These two things sort of made the book really appealing to me on the second listen. What did you think? You've had a chance to experience it the first time.
Well, I was also surprised. Well, I enjoyed Con Sagara. I had not. Well, I should say I had expected us to find the king with 10,000 faces at some point in the story. Didn't have to wait too long. I
Why did you think that that was going to come up? Because to me, when I first heard them talking about the book, it seemed very legendary. Like that was not something that was going to be a part of the books, at least from his discussions with his mentor and the way that that book was given to him. I didn't expect that suddenly this character was going to be real.
what I who's the Russian playwright that said the well, I guess because every piece of information that's trotted out in a story to me always has a reason. um, that Gibson that was so important with the the one thing that he carried from Gibson, and that Gibson took so from the hands of his mentor through his mother, was maintained with him. I mean, I knew that had very important foreshadowing for what was going to be coming in the story.
So you
And
saw it coming, but not necessarily in this part. You
well,
were a
the
little
other
surprised.
yeah, the other reason, why fantasy? Why do I enjoy fantasy? I could go read fiction where he discovers more about Khan Sagara in some book in a library, or those revelations are made. But I'd rather run into the character. And so that was gratifying to meet Khan Sagara, to also have the events that occurred with him and the Green Cloaks. I forget the name of the order, but I was by the end of this book. I was it I should say it was still going a little slow. I'm wading through it for some part. Um, Maybe kind of grappling with the time jumps, like this notion of being suspended in time. Is this 50 years in the future? They talk as if it's 50 years in the future. It's more like 10 years in the future. um, so I'm grappling with all of that, but by the end of it, I'm very interested to see, so to see what sort of mission this clandestine group had put him on. And
Well, we do have a very static universe in the way that Christopher Rocchio is setting up his entire larger universe. I think you find this out a little later, but I'll just speak to it a bit now since it's coming up. There and the Exosolarians actually fault the Empire for this, is that things aren't changing and that there aren't a lot of technological developments. And at least in the first book, you did hear about it because they talked about the plebeian caste, the way they're not allowed to use technology. So technology is really kept away from the people, and it makes for a very static universe where things aren't changing that much. So to say, there's a 50-year time jump and that it feels like 10 and that maybe not that much has occurred in the universe, that is kind of how things are being set up. And to me, that is partially reminiscent of Dune in the later parts, where this is what the God Emperor of Dune has done. He has put the world into this stasis event where things are unchanging. And so this type of idea that the rapid pace of technology is something that is used as a plot device in reverse, where you have the empire, which is trying to maintain the status quo by keeping technology away from the hands of the many, and then you have the extra Solarians who are out there doing body modifications, advancing the world of technology, embracing things that were forbidden them from the chantry. It's a dichotomy that I think is set up, and I enjoyed that part of it, to see that you have the planet bound, and then you have those that are out, traveling the stars, and there's a difference in the way that these cultures are approaching technology, whether they're using computers and whether they're using AI and whether they're embracing AI or not. This is one of the big setups for the entire larger universe.
I'm very interested in this relationship that they have with that those in the empire, their relationship with AI, with augmentation, I think is more to the point with machine augmentation. It's interesting how they have, like, they're okay with genetic augmentation for the Palatines, but they call they call the people who actually have neural implants witches, and forbid those in the Empire. I wondered what you thought about the reaction that Marlowe has whenever he runs into the clones that Khan Sagara is developing.
Oh, his kind of disgust for what he's doing, and the way that they can jump from body to body, and the way that he feels these are children, and the children should not embrace this idea that they're suddenly going to have all these memories downloaded into them.
Well, and all of that, and for me, this brought up discussions that we have in the world today with regards to um, where do we draw the line with medicine? Eh, I mean, it was one. It was interesting to me that he's so disgusted. Of course, he's coming from the root of the empire. He's in love with one of these witches who is augmented with a neural implant. His mind is open a little bit, but he seemed very closed off with, and viscerally disgusted with with these clones and how they're being used. And
I think that that's kind of what it's like to be raised in a religion in some ways. You have these preconceived notions loaded into you. You get it beat into you. And so his reactions in some ways, they feel natural for the way he was raised. I don't think at this point in the book he's starting to challenge much of his thought processes until the big event where he encounters the mystical event where he dies and then is swapped back in, and he meets the Howling Dark. This, I think, is the first part of where Hadrian as a character starts to broaden his perspective and mature a bit more, because he starts to have his worldview shaken. So I'm not surprised to have seen his reactions the way that they were for the first part of it, because he's still very much aligned with the empire, rooted in his upbringing, and really hasn't been challenged much in these ways, other than what happened to him in the ruins on the planet where he started, and all of a sudden I just brain farted the name of the planet.
yeah, I still haven't learned the planets well enough to call it up. But as he's having these experiences, once and for me, and I too, you actually said it. We have all spoilers here. Yes, he dies. He and he comes back. Um, uh, what a shock, or what a shock for him, I should say. But when he's wrestling with and and demonizing the practices. He's so disgusted with the practices. One, I'm thinking about organs, uh, the line of people in the world who are not interested in organ transfusion, blood transfusion, this sort of moving needle that we have with regards to how we heal our bodies, and how we've had this narrative of what is slavery, what is humane. And but to go like I guess I also think about what is slavery, because he seems so he he takes these clones as, oh, you are, um, you're slaves. You're bound to the will of somebody else, and they're unaware of it, and or maybe, or he assumes they're unaware of it. We find out later maybe they're not so unaware of it, and they're just along for the ride. They're enjoying their spaceship, and it's on different expectations of where it's going. Um, but I he doesn't I he meets, well, Consagara also is resurrected in a different way at the end, and he begins to grapple a little bit more with what this meaning of clones means, maybe what free will is, what his experience
Well,
in life
he
is.
he commits the one gravest sin of the extrasolarians, which is he has twinned himself. That is that is verboten. That is the thing that which should never happen. So it's a very interesting plot device that he is now two. He's a both a young girl and a young boy, and they're divided. And so this does not last in the series that they have a cooperation. They end up at odds with each other, and it's one of the reasons why the extrasolarians always want when they do this jump from body to body that they would never duplicate that mind. They say it causes all kinds of problems, and it also causes problems for themselves because now you have two beings that think they are the one and they fight with each other.
That reminds me of that old Michael Keaton movie. Well, I'm not surprised. I haven't gotten into to this merging conflict between the two consagaras, but I'm not surprised because that gets laid out uh, pretty well in the conversation after Marlowe's resurrection with Consagara. The divergence between the memories that are downloaded into or uploaded into their minds, and I think again like begins to question, what who are we, how much of us is, how much of our characters or our identities are bound up in the past experiences that we have, or in how we process the world. And so it's a good device, that Rukio brings forward to, um, between the two resurrections, to make these three immortals, as it gets put.
What did you think of the whole they're in the waiting room eating pastries? This that to me was kind of the weirdest part. On second listen and on first listen, that was like, what is going on here? It's like they're bringing out these delicacies. They're sort of being made to wait. I don't know. It's a test of patience. I feel this is reminiscent of some book that I haven't read. Like I should have been reminded of something here, or maybe this is very unique and novel to these books. But it just that was the weirdest part. I felt like the waiting to meet Consagara was kind of a bizarre point.
Kind of
Well,
reminded
but
me a little
that
bit of the. Sorry. The only thing that comes to mind when you said it should be a reference to another thing is the waiting room of the Oracle in the Matrix. All those people waiting to see her and hanging out, bending spoons. But it's not really a one-on-one comparison. But
I mean, I think of it as I thought of that in terms of power. Making people wait is about power, and also putting, I mean, even the time that he spends in the dungeon, which, by the way, Rukio invokes the word oubliette. He says dungeon sometimes, but then he says the oubliette, which I like so much. I don't know if y'all are familiar with the old oubliettes, but there
Yeah,
we are.
that's the French deep dungeon. This is a term that I've come across because it's used in different fantasy novels, and so I have experienced it a couple times. It's this deep dungeon of the French.
Well, and I don't know how common this concept of dungeons is. I think dungeons is a is a is a more modern uh, uh, understanding of the medieval world. They, if that they didn't keep people prison. You killed people, or you hung them out in public. And these punishments, like we have diversified power so much that we have this assumption that people have to do nasty, naughty things in secret. No, they were punishing people in the open. But oubliettes, they did have these holes, um, because oubliettes were often more like a hole or a cave, and they would throw some people in this hole, cover up the top with whatever, a cask of Amontillado, and but also the word means to forget. So that's the place where you forget someone. Um, but anyway, going back to the waiting room and the pastries, there is it's a mark of society to begin to understand these balances of power, and having to wait on someone. I forget who. I believe it was the CEO of ConocoPhillips, when he had his office designed. Frank Lloyd Wright designed his office. He had his back to the front door, and so when people would walk into his office, they have to walk all the way around him and all the way around to the front of his desk and then sit. And he could just pretend not to see him for all of that time. So, in the waiting room, I'm thinking about the affirmation of the power of Khan Sagara.
So we also have a really strong interaction with the Cielsen. So this is the first point where we start to really see the true nature of the Cielsen. And I find this race to be singularly interesting in fantasy and science fiction. I haven't really experienced anything quite like them. They have this weird submissive nature when they are presented with somebody who is much stronger than them. And so you start to see this here where Hadrian has subdued some of the Cielsen. They're acting very submissive to him, but then they're also extremely feral. They act like beasts, like animals in other ways that they're just very much not like humans at all. And this is where Hadrian first starts to experience the fact that he really can't reason with them. He really can't do some of the things that he set out to do. And he starts to see what a failure this actually is, and that he is getting challenged from both his worldview and the fact that he's now being presented with these sort of mystical powers that he doesn't really understand, and that he's been saved. And we also have the first sort of Christ-like thing that happens to Hadrian, where he's resurrected from the dead somehow by this god entity that we don't know too much about at this point, but something has happened. And he's also been gifted with this upgraded power. So his arm was sundered from his body. He now has this upgraded adamantine bone structure, which kind of makes me think of Wolverine. He's now been given this upgrade, and so he is on his Christ journey. His worldview has been rocked in some sense, and he's experiencing the Cielsen in a way that he knows now that he cannot reason, he cannot try to bargain with them, and that what he originally set out to do will not succeed. He is not going to be the arbiter. He is not going to be any sort of ambassador to the Cielsen. They are the Varels, to use the word from Ender's Game that I really liked. It means it's the beast that you can't reason with. And I thought that this was a fascinating part of what we get to see from the main enemy in the book.
So, well, this is the point that he is in the book, and maybe it doesn't change from there. But one, going Chekhov, by the way, I couldn't think of his name earlier. Chekhov's gun. You mentioned a gun in the second act. You better use it by the fourth. The entire series is called The Sun Eater, and he makes these allusions to burning and destroying the entire Cielsen race, or the majority of it, or the most of it, if not the whole thing. Kind of like Rand and the Aiel. in the prophecies and in the will of time. But as you come to find out in that, like, he's actually saving them and he's changing them. So I have to wonder, is this also starts out in the first book with Marlowe's desire to communicate with the alien, to communicate with the unknown other. And so that he begins to understand that maybe their values are different than him. I'm wondering if he's going to, change and be able to see life from their perspective. And we've mentioned some.
Well, all I can say is wait till you get to Kingdoms of Death, because when you get to Kingdoms of Death, you're going to get a real good look at the Cielson. It's, in my opinion, the highlight of the series. It's my favorite book of all of them that's been written. But I don't want to spoil that one too much for you, because I know that you're not even close to that one yet. You're still what? You're in the midst of book 3, I think, right?
I'm almost done with book 3, and I'm trying to keep them separate in my mind here. Okay, well, Kingdoms of Death. Now I'm looking forward to that, and also, not to talk too much about book 3, but I'm ripping through it. There's a lot. It's so difficult in laying out worlds and laying out all of these characters and some of the ideas that you're bringing to the fore to have a discussion about. But by book 3, it's really going. So anyone who's listening to this with all of our spoilers, sorry about that. It gets going, for at least for me. Like, book 3 is where I'm not my mind isn't wandering around and musing about some of these broader questions.
100% agree. Howling Dark was still, I was unsure about the series at this point. So I would say, if you're in this book, you're here listening to us talk about this, you're probably wondering if you should keep going. Do it. Like, I absolutely think you should keep going. This one has some low points, but you're also being exposed to some really great characters that are going to be here for the long haul. So all of these characters that are coming up, that are part of this pirate crew that they've assembled, Basander Lin, they will come back. And I honestly, Basander Lin, he is such a bastard in this book. He fights with Marlowe, just doesn't really like him. Um, they're at odds with each other. And I at first found myself not really liking Basander Lin, because obviously I'm resonating with the main character, with Hadrian. But on a subsequent read, you, in the first book, you're starting to see how much of a bastard Hadrian really is. He's a spoiled brat kid. He's not really a likable character, and he needs to learn a lot. And similarly, when you encounter Basander Lin, you see that he's kind of an honorable person that is trying to do the right thing by the Empire, which is, the Empire is at war, and he feels like he's off on this fool's errand with this ridiculous individual who he really doesn't like, and feels shackled to this stupid quest, and it's going nowhere, especially when they're pursuing something that is fable, is obviously fiction in the world. This would be like if we, in our world, were suddenly put on a quest to find the Holy Grail or something like that. It's this mythical thing that nobody really believes existed and is heard about for hundreds and thousands of years. And, it just is fanciful that it could ever be real. And suddenly it ends up being real.
So I'm wondering, as I'm reading this book, and especially in Howling Dark, with the more that we learned about the Cielson, I think a lot, as I would sit back and sort of grapple with where this is going and what his relationship is with the Cielson. I think about Alien and Aliens with Lieutenant Ripley, played by Sigourney Weaver. Did you draw any comparisons between Alien and Aliens, or?
Well, because the Cielson are so humanoid, it didn't immediately come up, but this idea that it's an alien that you can't reason with, that it's a race that fundamentally you can't have a real dialogue with, because there just is no common terminology, there's no common ground. That, in some ways, I feel was there, in the way that you have to just destroy them. There's nothing else to do. Like, they're trying to destroy us, they're trying to consume us. There's no way to really have a discussion with these two entities. It kind of reminds me of, I don't know, wolves and sheep. The wolves are just going to come in and eat the sheep. There's nothing really that the sheep can do. They can't reason with the wolves. If given the choice, the wolves will probably slaughter all the sheep, eat to their fill, and then move on to the next place, because that's just in the nature of of a wolf or any kind of a predator. And these are the analogies that are given. So in the way that, Alien and Aliens presents us with a predator that is preying on humanity, or that can't be reasoned with, that definitely felt resonant. I think, to me, the idea that comes up more often than anything else is a vampire. The Cielson to me felt like the vampires from what I had read in Stephen King's novels. So I'm thinking of something like Salem's Lot. The Cielson to me really felt like they were this vampiric type race that was preying on humanity.
It's interesting to me that you bring up wolves, because wolves have such a deep literary history. But I can hardly read Jack London and White Fang. I loved them when I was a child. Um, and I love samurai movies. I love westerns. I love these literary forms that tell us we must be, men must be strong and be able to rely on themselves, and nature is against them. But I don't, as I've gotten older and had other experiences in my life, I don't think that's true. I don't know if I've told you this. Once I met a biologist who had lived with the wolf pack in Yellowstone for many years, and I said to her, "Tell me something that would surprise me about wolves." And she said, "The alpha of a wolf pack is not the strongest and the meanest. It is the one that is most respected, and it's the one that is cared for by the rest of the wolves, and it is the one that makes sure things are fair, and that when the wolf cubs are born, that the weaker ones get their share of the food." And also she said, the alpha is not the one that leads the pack, it's the one that stays back. You'll find it in the front third, but not at the very first, because it is constantly going back to check for the stragglers, and will rush forward if the pack is attacked. So I think we have all of the, like, this narrative about about what our nature is, that is artificial. And even going back to
Well, with this Yeltsin, one of the things when they're negotiating, when they're trying to talk to the the leader of the Yeltsin, and they're having these discussions with the prince, you see that there is no word for equals. There's only a word where they want to have peace, and that word is submit. There is no way to have any other kind of discussion with the Yeltsin. Am I remembering right that this is the book where they have these?
yes,
Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
So this to me is where you can't reason with them. You can't have any common ground, because as they keep having these discussions, as they keep trying to find a way forward where they could maybe open up trade, have some kind of discussions, that they just keep saying, "Well, you're intending to submit to us. What gifts are you going to give me?" Because in the world of the Cielson, in the hierarchy of the Cielson, there is only like the master, or the one who is above, and those who have are completely dominated by whoever is in charge. And this is the relationship. And so they can't conceive of any relationship of equals, because in their culture, not only are they weird because they're these hermaphrodite, not male, not female, they're both, but they're also have no sense of peerage. It's always there is one at the top, and then there are those who are submitting to those who are beneath.
I said in the first one that this puts me in mind of Augustine of Hippo. And what you're describing here also, like, brings me back to the whatever the councils of not Nicaea, but Chalcedon. Help me out, Grant. You know what all those are. But there was this early argument in the church of whether, if Jesus was the Son of God, was he an equal to God, or was he second to God? And part of the how that religious conversation worked out was this notion of the triune God, and that they were
The
all
three in
equal.
one, the three
But
in one, yeah.
yeah, the three in one. And why? Oh, there was a spirit that both of them shared.
Well, to me, whenever I heard that, and like, because I was very much into studying higher dimensions, so it's like I always was intrigued by this idea of the fourth dimension. So I kind of thought of this like, oh, well, maybe God is this higher dimensional being, and he sticks three fingers into our dimension. It's like that's if you could think of a three-dimensional being penetrating a two-dimensional flat plane, you could put three fingers in there, and you'd say, well, are they distinct? Are they, co-equal? Whatever. Well, it's my three different fingers. They're definitely distinct and different, but they're all part of me, and they're all exerting the will that is the entity that has the hand in some sense. So I always kind of thought about it like that, and I don't think that there was any concept of that in the church. Definitely, when they were trying to grapple with these concepts.
I don't know. Maybe there was. Actually, I mean, I think there was. But I can't come up with it, and I don't want to wander off too deeply into these religious. I'm not prepared for that. But
Well, they feature prominently in the book this whole idea that there is some sort of a religion. It comes up repeatedly. I mean, the emperor is the god emperor. That's how the whole universe is set up, and I think we get to that later. We start to see rumblings of it here in Howling Dark, but it'll come more into play as at the end of Howling Dark, we have Hadrian being summoned to the empire and to the home planet.
well, and there's still very strongly this these the now I can't think of the word, the Inquisition still so strongly plays over this. I mean, I feel like we're really dwelling on um, whether this institution of a religion has their best interests in mind, and is there another way. So yeah, I'm as the
Well, the
you know
idea of the chantry descending upon Vorgossos is kind of an interesting thought. It doesn't happen, but there
but
it's go
yeah,
ahead.
but but everyone believes it does, or um, that's the lie that gets disseminated through the empire. So, and again, the green cloaks. I forget what order that Gibson was a part of, but they seem to be um, they seem to be the wise a wise group that was working maybe older than the
Oh,
empire, older than the
The
chantry.
scholiasts.
Yes, the scholiasts. So I'm very interested to know more about, as the series works out, more about the Cielson and also more about the scholiasts. I'm guessing, and you could probably confirm or deny, but maybe don't. I'm guessing that Sagara is going to deliver some insights into that in the future, especially maybe as you said earlier, if there's disagreements between the two Sagaras. Um, I wonder what they're going to disagree about. Might be something with the scholiasts. I don't know.
So as the book starts to wrap up, we see that they the conflict, the armed battle that occurs where Hadrian is killed, resurrected, and then he kills both princes of the Cielsen. This is monumental. You don't know how important this is, but in the world of the Cielsen, besting someone in single combat is quite the significant event. So for Hadrian to have killed one of the princes, you don't know how important this is in Howling Dark, but it will become extremely important later in the series, especially as you get to book four. So, a bit of foreshadowing here that this idea of single combat is incredibly important in the Cielsen culture, and most of what's happening in these books is discovering why the Cielson act the way they do, and how humanity sort of has to deal with their relationship to the broader universe. This plays greatly into the overarching story. And so getting to know the Cielson, and really hearing about how they work, and thinking about some of the mistakes that Hadrian's still making. I mean, think about what he really set out to do. He wanted to know the Cielson, and yet it's Valka who spends so much time with their wise one. I guess that's the thing that I think of, to borrow a term from the Wheel of Time. You've got this guy who's kind of steeped in the world of their religion, and she spends years upon years talking to him, and learning from him. I was shocked that Hadrian didn't want to participate in that as well. I mean, you think you have access to a CLs, and you have the ability to talk with someone ad nauseum. They're in your control and your power. You can pretty much query them on anything that you want to learn about. You think he would have just stayed awake and just done that for umpteen years.
Again, to bring this, what I'm always thinking about when I'm reading fantasy is what problems in society today is this addressing, and I think this is so much a discussion about empire and religion, and so I can't help but think about the tensions that we've seen in our lifetime, so deeply held between Christian, Judeo-Christian, and Islamic faiths. So, and not only that, I brought up Alien and Aliens earlier because that was an attempt to carry forth that discussion. I don't know if a lot of people understand or catch on to it when they watch old Sigourney Weaver, but that is a dramatization, a film dramatization or adaptation of A Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and that was hemming and hawing about the righteousness and the morality of empire moving into Africa in the 1890s. So I wonder what answers that the author, Christopher Ruocchio, has for us in the end. And I kind of like some answers. And that's why fantasy is a nice place to go to. But I don't know if you have anything else, but that's sort of, that's what I'm reading for right now.
Yeah, maybe just to sum it up, Howling Dark, not the pinnacle of the series, definitely a transitionary book. I'm still thinking, and I would love to ask the author this: where was this going? Because as he's recounting the entire story, you see that we have a bit of a, I don't know, what is it, the unreliable narrator. Is that's got to be partly what he set out to do as he recounted the tale? Because if he was telling the story from knowing where the entire story goes, and you kind of have this ending where he's like, I'll go on alone, dear reader, you have the foresight. And I'm thinking to myself, like, as the person who's reading this, I am the one who has the foresight, because I do know this story, because I'm reading it in its entirety. It's definitely not the first time through, but on the second pass, you do have the entire story. And so you start to look for, well, did he have the whole story in mind? And what was he discovering as he was going? Because there's little things that get littered into the books that you really don't catch up on unless you read it through twice. And then you start to see that some of the things that he says, I don't know if they're just straight out wrong, or if it's unreliable narrator or what, but this book is, it's one of the more difficult ones to get through, because it's more world building and you don't really know exactly where this is going to go. But stick with it to book 3, because man, you're in for a treat. Book 3 is where I really jumped in and started loving the series. So stick with it. It gets even better.
I think you're really onto something there with the unreliable narrator, because this is, in some ways, it's a memoir, and those are the most unreliable books that you could ever come across. We all retell our stories and pick from them, even in our motivations as well as the facts as to what happened. We select and write a rosy picture about ourselves, but maybe we'll learn more. Again, from the likes of Sagara or from whomever. But all right, we'll catch you on the next one.
All right, we'll see you.